Let me tell you something I've noticed after spending decades talking to people about their retirement finances. The changes that hurt you the most are never the dramatic ones. The market crashes, the layoffs, the headlines that scream at you from every financial news outlet. No. The changes that truly sting are the quiet ones, the ones that arrive wrapped in bureaucratic language, buried inside legislation with a name that sounds perfectly reasonable, and then one morning you wake up and realize the rules of the game have shifted entirely beneath your feet without anyone bothering to tap you on the shoulder. This is one of those moments. And I want to sit down with you today, really sit down the way I would if you were across the table from me, and walk you through something that has been quietly working its way through the retirement planning landscape. Something that if you are over 50 or approaching 50, or if you earn a solid income, or if you have spent years carefully mapping out your tax strategy for retirement, you absolutely cannot afford to miss. Because it is coming whether you are ready for it or not, and 2026 is not as far away as it sounds. I'm talking about the changes to catch-up contributions in your Roth 401k, courtesy of the Secure Act 2.0, which passed in late 2022. Most people never even heard the words Secure Act 2.0 until it was already law, and that is by design, I think. Because if you actually explained what some of these provisions do in plain English, the kind of English real people use when they talk about real money, the reception might have been a great deal cooler. So let's talk about it plainly, because that's what you deserve. I want to be upfront with you about something, and I say this not to be cynical, but because I think honesty is more valuable to you than false reassurance. I don't love this change. I really don't. And I've been doing this long enough to recognize when a piece of legislation is dressed up in the language of generosity while quietly slipping something uncomfortable into your pocket, or rather, out of it. The Secure Act 2.0 was sold broadly as a package of improvements to retirement savings. And some of it genuinely is. There are provisions in that law that I think are reasonable, even helpful, but buried deep inside the details, in the kind of section that most people skip, in the kind of language that makes your eyes glaze over. There is a provision that is, in effect, a tax increase on higher earning savers over 50. They just didn't call it that. What they said instead was that starting in 2026, catch-up contributions for certain earners must go into a Roth account. Mandatory, non-negotiable, whether that fits your tax strategy or not, whether you were counting on that pre-tax deduction or not. And look, Roth accounts are wonderful. I've said that for years and I'll keep saying it. Tax-free growth, tax-free withdrawals in retirement, no required minimum distributions. There is a great deal to love about the Roth structure, but there is an enormous difference between choosing a Roth contribution because it fits your situation and being told you have no other option. Choice matters, financial autonomy matters, and this rule takes that choice away from a specific group of people, specifically higher earners over age 50, in a way that will have real consequences for their take-home pay and their tax bill today. This is the Washington playbook, and I've watched it play out more times than I can count. They give with one hand, they take with the other, and they hope you are too busy living your life to read the fine print. I'm here to read the fine print with you. Here is the crux of it all, and I want you to pay close attention to this part, because the specific number matters, and the specific type of income they're measuring matters even more, which trips a lot of people up. Starting in 2026, if your FICA wages from your employer in the prior year, meaning 2025, were $145,000 or more, then all of your catch-up contributions to your 401k must go into a Roth account, not traditional pre-tax, Roth. You don't get to choose. Now, before you run a quick mental calculation and say, I make more than $145,000, or I make less than $145,000, I need you to slow down, because we are not talking about your total income. We are not talking about your gross salary. We are not talking about your side income, your spouse's income, your investment earnings, or the rental income you collect from the duplex you bought 3 years ago. We are talking specifically about your FICA wages from the employer sponsoring your retirement plan. And FICA wages are not the same as your gross compensation. That distinction is incredibly important. Here is what I'd like you to do right now, today, not next week, not when you have a minute. Pull up your most recent pay stub. If you don't have a paper copy lying around, log into your employer's payroll portal. Most companies have one now. Look for a line that says FICA wages or Social Security wages. That is the number you are looking for. Compare it to the $145,000 threshold. That comparison will tell you a great deal about what 2026 looks like for your catch-up contributions. Why FICA wages specifically? The IRS made this choice because FICA wages are calculated after certain pre-tax deductions, including things like your health insurance premiums and your HSA contributions, but they don't get reduced by all the same things that lower your adjusted gross income on your tax return. It creates a very specific measurement that sits somewhere between your gross pay and your net taxable income. Understanding that distinction is not just academic trivia. It becomes a genuine planning lever, and I'll come back to that. Let me make this concrete with a couple of examples because I think the numbers come alive when we put real people behind them. Meet Chase. He is 50 years old. His total W-2 compensation for 2025, including his base salary, his annual bonus, and the cash value of some benefits, comes to $160,000. That sounds well above the threshold, right? But here is the thing. His FICA wages, which reflect certain pre-tax deductions that come out of his paycheck, land at $140,000. That is $5,000 below the $145,000 cutoff. Because of that, Chase retains his ability to choose in 2026. He can still put his catch-up contributions into a traditional pre-tax 401k if he wants to, or he can choose Roth. That flexibility remains his. Now meet Fargo. He is 55. His total W-2 compensation for 2025 comes to $175,000. His FICA wages, after factoring in his specific benefit structure, come to $155,000. That puts him $10,000 above the threshold. Fargo does not get to choose. Starting in 2026, every dollar of his catch-up contribution must go into a Roth 401k, no exceptions. Same general income range, same age bracket. Completely different outcomes based on a specific wage calculation that most people have never paid attention to before. There is a third scenario worth mentioning because it adds another layer of complexity that can feel particularly frustrating. What if your FICA wages push you above the $145,000 mark, but your employer's 401k plan doesn't even offer a Roth option? This is more common than people realize, particularly among smaller employers or older plan structures that haven't been updated. In that case, you would not be permitted to make catch-up contributions at all in 2026 because you are required to use Roth, and Roth isn't available. That is a significant problem for someone who was counting on those extra contributions to build their retirement security. If you are in that situation, I would strongly encourage you to have a direct conversation with your HR department or your plan administrator now, not next year. Plan amendments take time. The clock is already ticking. Let's talk numbers, because this is ultimately about money, specifically how much you are allowed to save and what form that savings has to take. For 2025, the standard 401k contribution limit sits at $23,500. This is the baseline that applies to virtually everyone participating in a 401k, regardless of age. Think of it as the floor of what you're permitted to put away. Once you reach age 50, the government extends an additional opportunity that they call catch-up contributions. The thinking behind this is that many people in their 50s are hitting their peak earning years. Their children may be grown, their mortgage might be paid down or nearly so, and they have more room in their budget to direct toward retirement savings, so the rules allow them to put in extra. For 2025, the standard catch-up for those 50 and older is $7,500, bringing the total potential contribution to $31,000 for the year. That is not insignificant. Over several years, that extra $7,500 annually can compound into a meaningful addition to your retirement nest egg. But the Secure Act 2.0 added something new and genuinely interesting, a super catch-up provision for people between the ages of 60 and 63. If you fall into that specific window, not 59, not 64, but specifically 60, 61, 62, or 63, your catch-up contribution limit jumps from $7,500 to $11,250. That means your total potential contribution for 2025, if you're in that age band, is $23,500 plus $11,250, which equals $34,750. That is a substantial opportunity, and one that I genuinely think is one of the better pieces of Secure Act 2.0. The reason I appreciate that provision is that the early 60s is often a period when retirement feels vivid and immediate in a way it didn't before. You can see it on the horizon. The urgency to save becomes real in a different way. Giving people in that window a larger savings lane makes intuitive sense. Now, here is the frustrating intersection of these two provisions. Both the standard age 50 catch-up and the super catch-up for ages 60 to 63 are subject to the same income-based Roth mandate starting in 2026. It doesn't matter whether you're putting in $7,500 or $11,250 as your catch-up amount. If your prior year FICA wages exceeded the threshold, all of it must go Roth. The official 2026 contribution limits won't be released by the IRS until around October or November of this year, but based on where inflation has been running, the numbers are likely to move modestly upward. My best estimate is that the standard limit will rise to somewhere around $24,000. The age 50 catch-up may increase to around $8,000, and the FICA income threshold itself, currently at $145,000, will probably adjust to somewhere in the neighborhood of $150,000. These are estimates, and I want to be clear about that. The IRS will have the official word later this year, and I'll share those numbers as soon as they're available. I want to pause here and say something important because I don't want anyone to walk away from this conversation feeling defeated or paralyzed. Being required to contribute catch-up dollars to a Roth 401k is not a catastrophe. It is a change. It is a change that removes a choice you previously had, which I think is genuinely frustrating and worth acknowledging. But Roth accounts have real, substantial long-term benefits, and in some circumstances, particularly if you believe your tax rate in retirement will be similar to or higher than your current rate, Roth contributions can actually work in your favor. The core trade-off is this: with traditional pre-tax contributions, you get a tax deduction today, your money grows tax-deferred, and you pay income taxes when you withdraw in retirement. With Roth contributions, you get no deduction today, but your money grows completely tax-free, and qualified withdrawals in retirement are also completely tax-free. The question of which is better is genuinely complex and depends on your current tax rate, your expected tax rate in retirement, how long you have until you retire, and a host of other variables. For some people, those who are in high tax brackets now and expect to be in lower brackets in retirement, losing the pre-tax deduction on catch-up contributions is a real financial sting. For others, having a pool of tax-free money waiting in retirement is enormously valuable, particularly given the uncertainty around future tax rates and the wild card of required minimum distributions from traditional accounts. The problem isn't Roth. The problem is being told you have no choice, and that is what I want you to understand clearly so you can make informed decisions around it. Now, here is where I want to shift from explaining the problem to equipping you with the tools to respond to it, because there are real, practical strategies available to people who find themselves hovering near that $145,000 FICA wage threshold, strategies that can potentially bring that number down and restore your ability to choose how your catch-up contributions are structured. The single most powerful tool in this particular toolkit is the Health Savings Account, or HSA. If you are enrolled in a high-deductible health plan through your employer and you are not already maxing out your HSA, I want you to seriously reconsider that. The HSA is, in my view, one of the most underutilized accounts in personal finance. It is also one of the rare accounts that can directly reduce your FICA wages, which means it pulls double duty as both a healthcare savings tool and a tax management lever. Here's the triple advantage of the HSA that I never get tired of talking about. Your contributions go in pre-tax, which lowers your taxable income and your FICA wages. The money grows tax-free inside the account, and when you use it for qualified medical expenses, either now or in retirement, the withdrawals are also tax-free. There is no other account in the tax code that delivers all three of those benefits simultaneously. For 2025, the HSA contribution limit is $4,300 if you have self-only coverage. If you're 55 or older, you can add a $1,000 catch-up on top of that for a total of $5,300. If you have family coverage, the limit rises to $8,550. Every dollar you contribute through payroll deduction reduces your FICA wages, which could be the difference between landing above or below that $145,000 threshold. And the key is to make sure those contributions are coming directly out of your paycheck, not being deposited separately. Payroll-deducted HSA contributions are exempt from FICA taxes in a way that out-of-pocket contributions are not. The second strategy worth considering is the Flexible Spending Account, or FSA. These accounts operate differently from HSAs. They come with a use it or lose it feature that means you can't bank unused dollars the way you can with an HSA, but they can still be effective at reducing your FICA wages for predictable recurring expenses. If you have regular prescription costs, routine medical appointments, glasses or contacts, or if you pay for dependent care, an FSA can put pre-tax dollars to work on those expenses and simultaneously bring your wage number down. The important thing with FSAs is to be realistic and deliberate about how much you contribute. I've seen people overestimate their medical costs, over-contribute, and end up forfeiting dollars at year's end. That defeats the purpose entirely. Know your actual spending patterns and contribute accordingly. Third, and this one may feel so obvious that it barely seems worth mentioning, but I assure you it is worth understanding clearly, your employer-sponsored health insurance premiums and dental premiums, if they are deducted from your paycheck on a pre-tax basis, are already working to reduce your FICA wages. Most people are enrolled in this kind of pre-tax benefit arrangement without even thinking about it, but it is worth verifying that your premiums are in fact being deducted pre-tax, and it is worth understanding how those deductions factor into the overall picture of your FICA wages. One caveat I want to offer here with real sincerity: not every pre-tax deduction reduces your FICA wages. The FICA calculation follows specific rules, and the relationship between your various payroll deductions and your final FICA wage figure is not always intuitive. Before you assume that a particular change to your benefits elections will achieve a specific result, I would encourage you to either look carefully at your pay stub to see what changes when, or consult with a financial advisor or CPA who can walk through the math with you. The last thing I want is for someone to restructure their benefits based on a misunderstanding and end up surprised. I want to close with something that I feel genuinely deeply in a way that goes beyond the tax tables and the contribution limits and the FICA wage calculations. Retirement planning is an act of care. It is something you do for your future self, for the person you will be in 10 or 15 or 20 years, who will wake up one morning and be grateful or not for the decisions you made today. And in all the noise of daily life, the work pressures and the family obligations and the news cycle and the 10,000 other things demanding your attention, these quiet, unsexy, complicated details about contribution limits and income thresholds can feel very easy to let slide. Don't let them slide. Not this one. Because here is the truth of it. The people who are comfortable in retirement are almost never the ones who got lucky with one big investment decision. They are the ones who paid attention consistently to all the small decisions, the contribution amounts, the tax treatment of their savings, the subtle rule changes that shifted the landscape. They are the ones who adjusted their course as the rules changed, rather than being caught off guard when they finally checked their balance at 64 and realized the math didn't work the way they thought it would. That is who I want you to be, not paralyzed, not overwhelmed, not angry at a piece of legislation you can't change, but informed, equipped, and making active decisions rather than passive ones. So here is your action plan, stated plainly. First, find your FICA wages. Pull your most recent pay stub today. Look for your Social Security wages or FICA wages line and determine where you stand relative to the $145,000 threshold for 2025. If you're unsure where to find that number, call your payroll department. This is exactly the kind of question they field all the time. Second, if you are close to that threshold, within striking distance of it, look seriously at your HSA and FSA options. Even a few $1,000s in additional HSA contributions could move you below the line and give you back the flexibility to choose how your catch-up money is treated in 2026. Third, if your employer's 401k plan does not currently offer a Roth option, make that known to your HR team now. That is a plan-level decision that takes time to implement, and the window to address it before 2026 is narrowing. Fourth, don't stop saving. Whatever happens with the Roth mandate, whether it applies to you or not, keep contributing. The worst possible response to a frustrating rule change is to disengage from the process entirely. The tax treatment of your dollars matters, but the amount of dollars you save matters more. Keep saving. And finally, get help if you need it. These rules are genuinely complicated. They interact with each other in ways that are not always obvious, and the right strategy depends on details that are specific to your income, your employer's plan, your tax situation, and your retirement timeline. There is no shame in sitting down with a financial advisor who can walk through your specific situation with you and help you make sense of all of this. Because here's what I know after all these years. The people who thrive in retirement are the ones who treated it as something worth paying attention to, even when the details were tedious, even when the rules were maddening, even when the government moved the goalposts in the fourth quarter without a proper announcement. You are paying attention. That already puts you ahead of most people, and that matters more than any single rule change ever could. I don't want to skip past something that I think is easy to overlook when we spend all our time in the technical weeds. This stuff can feel demoralizing, and that is a completely legitimate feeling. You have done the right things. You have worked hard. You have earned a good income. You have saved consistently. And then someone in Washington rewrites the rules, and suddenly the strategy you carefully built around pre-tax catch-up contributions is no longer available to you. Not because of anything you did wrong, but because your paycheck crossed an invisible line. That can feel deeply unfair, and I think it is worth sitting with that frustration for a moment before pushing through to the action steps. Acknowledging the frustration doesn't mean surrendering to it. It just means being honest about what this is. This is not a tax benefit that was made available to everyone and then taken away from everyone. This is a change that specifically targets higher earners, people who, by many measures, are already paying more than their share, and removes a tax planning option from their hands. Calling that what it is doesn't make you a malcontent. It makes you clear-eyed. And once you're clear-eyed, you can get back to the business of making the best decisions available to you within the rules as they exist. That is all any of us can do. Let me spend a moment here on something I glossed over slightly earlier because it deserves more nuance. I said that the problem with this rule isn't Roth itself, it's the loss of choice. And I stand by that, but I also want to give credit where it's due and acknowledge that for some people, mandatory Roth catch-up contributions might actually work out reasonably well, not because the mandate itself is good policy, but because their individual circumstances happen to align with what Roth offers. If you are someone who expects your tax rate in retirement to be similar to your current rate, the Roth structure becomes relatively neutral from a pure tax math standpoint. You give up the deduction today, but gain the tax-free income tomorrow. The present value calculation depends on assumptions about future tax rates, investment growth, and the length of your retirement, none of which we can know with certainty. If you are someone who anticipates significant required minimum distributions from traditional retirement accounts, meaning you've accumulated substantial pre-tax savings and will be forced by the IRS to take taxable distributions starting in your mid-70s, regardless of whether you need the income, then having a portion of your savings in Roth actually provides useful diversification. It gives you a tax-free bucket to draw from strategically. And if you are someone who is thinking about estate planning and potentially leaving assets to heirs, Roth accounts carry no RMDs during your lifetime and can be particularly advantageous to pass along. Your beneficiaries still have to take distributions, but the underlying growth was tax-free, which can be a meaningful gift. None of this makes the mandate good, but it does mean that if you are going to be subject to it, you can choose to look at it not just as something being done to you, but as something you can work with, an enforced diversification of your tax exposure that may, in retrospect, turn out to have been sensible. That reframe won't work for everyone. If you are genuinely in a high tax bracket right now and expect to be in a meaningfully lower bracket in retirement, if your income is driven by a peak earning career that will wind down, if you expect to move to a lower cost of living state, if you anticipate deductions in retirement that aren't available to you now, then the loss of the pre-tax deduction on catch-up contributions is a real financial cost. And I want to honor that reality too. The point is, understand your own situation clearly enough to know which of these scenarios applies to you. Don't just assume the Roth mandate is catastrophic, but don't dismiss it either. Do the math, or have someone help you do the math, and make a conscious decision about how to respond. Retirement planning, at its core, is not about tax codes. It is not about contribution limits. It is not about FICA wages or Roth mandates or catch-up provisions. It is about freedom. The freedom to stop working when you want to stop, not when you're forced to. The freedom to spend your time, your irreplaceable, non-renewable time, on the people and experiences and pursuits that matter most to you. The freedom to be generous with the people you love. The freedom to face the unexpected costs that come with aging without fear and without compromise. All of this technical detail, and I know it is a lot of detail, exists in service of that freedom. Every dollar you save, every smart decision you make about the tax treatment of those dollars, every time you read the fine print that most people skip, it is all building toward that. It is all an investment in your own future autonomy. And that is worth fighting for, even when the rules are complicated, even when Washington moves the goalposts, even when the legislation designed to help you save for retirement manages to do something rather different in practice. Stay engaged, stay informed, and keep saving. Because the version of you sitting in retirement 10 or 15 years from now, the one with the morning coffee and the freedom to decide what today looks like, is counting on the decisions you make right now, not someday, now. And you are more than capable of making the right ones.